Whatever is fair to the world is foul for us, and whatever is foul for the world is fair for us. Let us travel in this filthy air. He thought he had taken all the risk to become the king, and how can it easily pass to his friends' heirs? So therefore he had arranged assassins to kill Banquo. She says that my hands are drenched in blood, and this smell of blood cannot be sweetened by the perfumes of Arabia as well. Hello students, I am Anil, Assistant Professor of English, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. Welcome to the second session of Macbeth. So here we are going to discuss the important scenes in Macbeth and important characters in the play Macbeth. So we know the story of Macbeth. It starts with the introduction of a scene where we find it very weird. That is the opening scene. Shakespeare gives special importance to opening scenes of his play. Any of his plays, if you take Shakespeare's plays, so the very first scene and first act has very different type of introduction where it creates curiosity in the audience. The opening scene of any play of Shakespeare have unique features. They act as the keynote to the entire play. So when you observe it, you finding very interesting. Something is going to happen inside the play. That is what you feel when you read or when you watch the plays of Shakespeare. They generally introduce the important characters directly or indirectly. In most of the plays, the very first act, first scene, they introduce the major characters of the play. Then they create atmosphere for the action. So something is going to happen. It creates an atmosphere for future action in the play. They are the link to the past, present and future in the play. So these are very important thing. The very first act, first scene, it creates a connection between past, present and future. It simulates the interest of the audience. It stimulates the interests in the audience. They create fear, suspense and curiosity and thus hold the attention of the audience as well. So very first act, first scene, they do all these things. This is how Shakespeare makes his plays very interesting. So this is what happens in the Shakespeare's first act, first scene. So talking about Macbeth, the first act, first scene. The first act, first scene, we find three witches. So these three witches are talking to each other. So they are supernatural elements. They are like magicians, but with negative characters in them. So they act as very interesting or suspenseful features in the first act, first scene. The three witches. So they talk to each other. They wanted to meet a character, Macbeth. Which one, two, three? They say, when shall we meet Macbeth? And they say, we will meet Macbeth when the war ends. And they also say, the war is going to end that evening itself. Therefore, we come to know about a character, Macbeth, a very important character. So after discussing this, they decide to meet a place on the battlefield and they say, fair is foul, foul is fair, hover through the fog and the filthy air. This means whatever is fair to the world is foul for us, and whatever is foul for the world is fair for us. Let us travel in this filthy air and let us see what we can do. So therefore, the first act, first scene is very important in this play Macbeth. Moving on to the next important scene, that is Act 1, Scene 3. It is called Temptation Scene by the critics and also the readers of Shakespeare's play Macbeth. So here in Act 1, Scene 3, the three witches, they meet Macbeth. So when they meet Macbeth, they salute him, saying, "Hail, the Thane of Glamis." Macbeth is already the Thane of Glamis. He is the general of Scotland army. And the first witch says, "Hail, Thane of Glamis." The second witch says, "Hail, Thane of Cawdor." And the third witch says, "Hail to the future king of Scotland." So when this was said, Macbeth is already the Thane of Glamis. He is surprised that the next witch said he will be the Thane of Cawdor. For his surprise, one of the soldiers from the king arrives and tells he had been appointed as the Thane of Cawdor. Therefore, he thinks that the prophecies of these witches are coming true immediately, and therefore this is not too far, becoming the king of Scotland. So here Macbeth feels very much tempted. So his inner desires, his deep desires surface, and this is where Macbeth's real character falls down. He was a very good man, people had respect for him, his king believed him, but this scene where three witches tempted Macbeth, and Macbeth is a victim of the temptation. Therefore, this scene, Act 1, Scene 3, is very important. Then the murder scene, proceeding with the novel, proceeding with the play, we come to the second act, second scene. So Macbeth goes back from the battlefield after witches have prophesied about his future. He writes a letter to his lady. She reads the letter. She is also very much tempted, and she wanted those three prophecies to be immediately fulfilled. She joins the plan of Macbeth. Then they both decide to kill King Duncan. And Duncan, for their surprise, says that he will visit the place of Macbeth. And there they plan for the murder of King Duncan. So therefore, a murder scene also becomes very important. In Act 2, Scene 2, Macbeth, provocated by his lady Macbeth, he goes and kills King Duncan. When he kills King Duncan, a sound, a voice screams, and that voice says, "Sleep no more, Macbeth has murdered sleep, the innocent sleep." The voice also continued saying, "Glamis has murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more, Macbeth shall sleep no more." So when Macbeth kills King Duncan, Duncan who was sleeping, a voice, maybe it is his inner voice or maybe a voice of guilt, it starts screaming and it says, "He shall not sleep." So this scene is very important because this is the climax where the twist takes place. Macbeth was a very good man, his reputation is going up, and after killing King Duncan, then we see that his reputation falls down. Therefore, Act 2, Scene 2 is very important. Coming to the porter scene, this also takes place in Act 2, the very next scene of Act 2, Scene 2. So there is a porter. All the people of the king had visited Macbeth. They were given food, they were given drinks. They all were under the influence of alcohol. This porter was a gatekeeper. So when Macbeth kills King Duncan, there is something happening inside the Macbeth's castle where there is a porter who is keeping the gate. So he is really drunk and somebody comes to Macbeth's place. So they bang the door. They requested him to open the door. But this porter, who is already drunk and under the influence of alcohol, thinks that now he is the gatekeeper of hell, where people are brought, they were judged according to their goods and bads, and they were being punished. So here he says he is feeling as a man of the hell, a man keeping the gates of hell. So he talks about very other characters, and he talks about their goods and bads. Using this Act 2, Scene 3, Shakespeare has tried to imitate and criticize the existing society of his time. Therefore, this scene is also important when you read the play. Then the banquet scene. So this banquet scene takes place after the death of King Duncan. His sons Malcolm and Donalbain, they run away to Ireland and England respectively. Then, in their absence, where Macbeth is a relative of King Duncan and second in line to become the King of Scotland, becomes the King of Scotland as prophesied by the witches. So when this happens, now Macbeth takes the place of the king, Lady Macbeth takes the place of the queen. They throw a party to all their respected noblemen or their trusted people. And that is called the banquet scene. So, before the party began, or before the banquet began, Macbeth had arranged for the killing of Banquo, his co-general of Scotland army, because the witches have told that Banquo will not become anything but his sons will become the heirs of Scotland. So, realizing this point, Macbeth wanted to destroy the family of Banquo. He thought he had taken all the risk to become the king, and how can it easily pass to his friends' heirs? So therefore he had arranged assassins to kill Banquo. But they killed Banquo, they failed to kill Fleance, Banquo's son. Therefore he is really worried. That evening when the party begins, when he is talking to each nobleman, addressing the gathering, when he wanted to go and sit on a chair, empty chair, he looked at the ghost of Banquo. When he looked at the ghost of Banquo, Macbeth loses his psychological state. He was really horrified. He says, "You don't have blood and you don't have flesh in your body. You are just a ghost. Go away, go away." When he talks to an empty chair where people cannot see the ghost of Banquo, Macbeth can see the ghost of Banquo. He acts very weirdly. And Lady Macbeth tries to control him, calm him down, but she succeeds in the beginning. Later, the ghost appears again. So ghost appears first time, Banquo is seen by only Macbeth, and Macbeth loses his psychological state. Lady Macbeth helps him. But for the second time, when it happens, Macbeth could not control. He forgets everybody present there and he behaves very unusually. Therefore, Lady Macbeth dismisses the gathering. Therefore, this scene talks about his sense of guilt awakening. Macbeth's sense of guilt awakening, and he is losing his senses when the guilt is overpowering Macbeth. Next scene is the sleepwalking scene, where we find Lady Macbeth, who was the soul of Macbeth, who encouraged Macbeth to fulfill his dreams, who did everything possible to make her husband the King of Scotland. She, under the influence of her guilt, she becomes a patient of somnambulism. Somnambulism. Somnambulism is a disorder where people start walking during their sleep. So therefore the scene is sleepwalking scene, Act 5, Scene 1. While sleeping, she wakes up. Her eyes are wide open, but still this woman is sleeping. She takes a candle kept near her bed. She holds it. She walks as if she is unaware of the world. And then she goes near a sink and she starts washing her hand. And when she is doing it, she talks about the murder she and her husband committed in Act 2, Scene 2. Yet who would have thought that the old man to have had so much of blood in him? Now she is feeling as if she is washing her hands. Then this is being observed by a doctor and a nurse who were appointed to look after Lady Macbeth. So the doctor observes the significance of her words. Here, Lady Macbeth rubs her hands and washes them for quarter an hour. She speaks again. So after washing it for quarter an hour, she speaks. Here is the smell of blood still. Still there is smell of blood. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh, oh, oh. She says that my hands are drenched in blood, and this smell of blood cannot be sweetened by the perfumes of Arabia as well. So much is the amount of guilt of Lady Macbeth. This scene reflects her sense of guilt. Then, having said this, she returns to bed. Through her speech and action, she reveals the secrets. The doctor comes to the conclusion and says, the doctor understands that this is a psychological state where she is feeling the intensity of her guilt, And he says, "This disease is beyond my practice. Those who walk in their sleep die holily in their bed." So he says, this woman is going to die because she has gone too far, disturbed in her psychology. After observing all these scenes, we come to the major characters of Macbeth. First one is the Macbeth himself. So Macbeth is the protagonist. Macbeth is the protagonist of the play, and his rise and fall is what makes audience feel for Macbeth. So in the beginning, Macbeth is a very brave soldier. Under the orders of King Duncan, he goes with Banquo and puts down a rebellion against King Duncan. He was a brave soldier. In the beginning, one of the soldiers, when he narrates the entire war going on to the king, he says, Macbeth fought like a lion. In the beginning, he also felt fear, but later on, he fought like a lion and he destroyed his enemies. So he's a very brave soldier. Then his loyalty to King Duncan and his friends. In the very first scene and first act, very second scene and second act, we understand that he was very loyal to King Duncan. Even though the witches tempted him, he wanted to not listen to them. He did not want to proceed with his plan of killing King Duncan and then becoming king. So they all reflect that he was loyal in the beginning. Then his kindness. When he was told to go and kill King Duncan, he said, "No, I don't want to kill King Duncan. I have the popularity now. I wanted to enjoy this popularity right now." When he tells this to his wife, Lady Macbeth says, "Were you drunk when you told me the plan of killing King Duncan?" After her persuasion, Macbeth decides to kill King Duncan. So he was very kind. Lady Macbeth says, "You are the milk of human gentleness." A man of ambition and becomes a murderer. He wanted to become the king of Scotland. When the witches tempted him, we observe that Macbeth is talking to oneself. He is very much elated that he will become the king of Scotland. When the news arrived telling that he is appointed as the Thane of Cawdor as well, Macbeth believed it blindly. Though Banquo said, "Don't believe them, they are just apparitions, they are just bubbles on earth," Macbeth did not listen. He is lost in his own thoughts and he thinks that everything that is said by the witches are going to be true. Yes, they are going to be true, but they lead him to the negative side of his life. He had that ambition, and by the influence of his own self and his own wife, he becomes a murderer. He first kills King Duncan and later on goes on killing Banquo. He tries to kill his son Fleance as well. Then he wanted to take revenge on the sons of King Duncan. Then he goes on to killing the wife and children of Macbeth. Therefore, Macbeth turns out to be a murderer. And finally, he is a victim of the witches' temptation. So Macbeth was a very good man in the beginning. From his position, he comes down and he dies in the end. So what happened to Macbeth? It was the temptation of the witches. Sometimes we can understand this play as our inner temptations, which prod us to go and take the negative routes. And here, Macbeth becomes a victim of such temptations by the witches and his own self. Next important character is the Lady Macbeth. She is the wife of Macbeth, a very good lady in the beginning. And she is a very courageous woman. She receives a letter from Macbeth where he explained about the witches and their prophecy. This woman is the one who makes that temptations last long and became a cause of Macbeth's destruction. More ambitious than her husband. So this point reflects that when Macbeth wanted to not go according to the plan, she tempts him. She calls him very bad names. And she tells, "Were you drunk? Are you a woman? If you are not going with the plan," because fate and his future are promised by the witches. Everything is in support of Macbeth. Then why are you not proceeding with your plan? Go and kill King Duncan. She encourages Macbeth. So this point proves that she is more ambitious than Macbeth. A ruthless woman. While encouraging Macbeth, she tells, "In order to fulfill this idea, I'll go to an extent where if a child is suckling from my breast, I'll take it out and smash its head onto the floor and kill it. So, such is the intensity of this woman's ambition, and such is the ruthlessness of Lady Macbeth. And sometimes critics have also called Lady Macbeth as the fourth witch. There were three witches in the beginning. By telling the future, they tempted Macbeth, and this woman becomes the fourth witch by making Macbeth do what those three witches wanted. And finally, she is a fragile character in the end. When Macbeth loses his guilt, she tried to help him, but in the end, when we move on to the fifth act, we see Lady Macbeth suffering from the guilt. She is suffering from somnambulism, and finally she commits suicide. Next characters. Next character is Banquo, general of Macbeth, and Banquo are two generals of Scotland army. Where Macbeth is the protagonist, Banquo is his co-character. When Macbeth is being tempted by the witches, Banquo was present there. But he did not give much attention to those witches' prophecies, where they said Banquo's sons will become the kings of Scotland. He told Macbeth not to believe because they always say half-truth. Don't believe them, he suggested as a good friend. He is also a brave soldier. In the war, where they wanted to curb a rebellion against King Duncan, Banquo played an equal role like Macbeth. Those witches, when hailing Macbeth, they say, you are great like Macbeth, but you are not greater than Macbeth. They already broke their trust. And he is a very brave soldier, and he is a sensible man because he told Macbeth not to believe witches. They are like bubbles on earth. If you believe them, your destruction is fixed. You will get destroyed by these temptations. Don't believe them. They are like bubbles. He warned Macbeth, but Macbeth's ambitions overpowered the suggestions of Banquo. And he is an opposite character of Macbeth. Macbeth became a victim of his temptations, but Banquo, he avoided those temptations. He went according to his will. He became a very good man. He was on the side of Macbeth, but it is Macbeth who mistook his silence, and he makes an arrangement for killing Banquo. And Banquo is attacked by the assassins and he gets killed in the play. Then King Duncan, though there is little about King Duncan in the play, he is a very fatherly figure in the play. He believed completely. In the beginning he says, when the rebellion is happening, he says, I trusted Macdonald, the Thane of Cawdor, and he blindly believed them, and this caused trouble for King Duncan. Therefore, he sent Macbeth and Banquo to put down the rebellion. And he believed Macbeth blindly. He did not have a little bit of suspicion over Macbeth's ambition. He goes to his place in order to celebrate the victory of Macbeth and Banquo. But he gets killed in his place. A fatherly figure, a good king. He respected Lady Macbeth as well. As a token of love and respect and of affection, he gifts Lady Macbeth a diamond ring. But what happens to him? He gets killed in the second act, second scene. He is a victim of his own trust. He trusted the people around him. He failed to understand the ambitions of Macbeth. Therefore, he is dead. Therefore, this character is important in the play. Going to the next characters, Malcolm and Donalbain, Macduff. Malcolm and Donalbain, they are the sons of king. After the death of King Duncan, Malcolm goes to England and Donalbain goes to Ireland, where they make preparations in order to find out the real killer, and they understand that it is Macbeth. After becoming king, Macbeth goes on killing more people, creating misrule in Scotland, and therefore people come to understand that Macbeth is the real murderer. Therefore, Malcolm and Donalbain, when their father was murdered in Macbeth's castle, they immediately disappeared from the place. They did not trust anybody there. They just vanished from their place. And after understanding the situation, they take the help of the King of England they take the help of their friends and they attack Macbeth. So their roles are also very important. And who is Macbeth? Macbeth is a very important character. When Macbeth becomes the king of Scotland, he did not know what is going to happen now. So things are going against Macbeth. Everybody is opposing Macbeth. So he goes to the witches to ask what is there in future for Macbeth. The witches, they tell him a very tricky thing where Macbeth fails to understand them. Macbeth fails to understand them. The witches said, you must beware of Macbeth. And Macbeth says, okay, I'll be careful about Macbeth. Then the second thing they said, Macbeth cannot be killed by any man born out of woman. So when this was said, he underestimates Macbeth. The next thing, Macbeth cannot be harmed until the forest of Burnham moves to the castle of Dunsinane. Macbeth fails to understand the intensity and understand the twist that is inside these prophecies. So finally, it is Macbeth who is not born of woman. He is born out of cesarean, where he says, I was brought to this world ripping my mother's womb. That means he was born unnaturally. Therefore, he is the one who is going to kill Macbeth. In the end, he beheads Macbeth and brings his head onto the stage and says, the traitor is killed. So therefore, all these characters are very important. There are many other minor characters. Once you read the novel, you'll get to know their importance. All these characters are very important. When you read this novel, we understand every man's temptations. We all have temptations around us, but whether or not to give in is the question. So here, Macbeth chooses his own destruction. Listening to the words of witches, he is finally killed. He takes the wrong path and then he becomes the victim of his temptations. So keeping all these points in mind, I wish you all the best for your examinations. All the best. Thank you.